pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The next item is attendance. Suzanne, will you do doing that?
Mr. Mundy,
Present.
Mr. Lake,
Present.
Mr. Patel,
Present.
Mrs. Postlethwaite,
Present.
Mr. Jones.
Present.
Thank you. The next item is the approval of the July 6, 2022 minutes. Those were provided to you in your packets. Are there any questions or changes to be made to those minutes? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Patel. All those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, same sign. The minutes are approved. The next item, not on the agenda, but we have made a practice of waiving our standard practice of requiring certified notification to all those that must receive notice. We've allowed for that to be done with first-class mail during the pandemic. And we have had one notice been given by one of the petitioners in that fashion. So is there a motion to waive that requirement for this meeting?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Patel. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. That is approved. Thank you. I'll note that we have had a request for withdrawal on docket number 2022-41-DSV D. Lindner at 9199 Brookstone Place, Zionsville, Indiana. They have made a timely request to withdraw their petition. There's no need to make a motion on that. It is automatic, but just want to note it for the record. With that, we will move on to the agenda. The first item is docket number 2022-39-DSV D. Carey at 11875 East 200 South Zionsville. This is a petition which was heard at the July Board of Zoning Appeals meeting, and we had a split vote. We had a board comprised of 4 members that night. The vote was 2-2, so it is an automatic continuance to be heard again this evening. We do have all 5 members with us, 4 present and 1 virtual. I'd also ask from the back if we have any individuals during the course of this evening's meetings that wish to speak or be heard. If you would let me know, and I'd ask right now if there is a count of any individuals that are joining us virtually. Thank you. I'd like some active physical movement back there to make sure that I know that if there is something happening there. All right, this Mr. Andreoli, you'll be representing Carey.
Yes, thank you,
evening.
Mr. President. For the record, Mike Andreoli, 1393 West Oak Street here in Zionsville. I represent Mr. and Mrs. Carey, who are with us tonight. It looks like they brought their entire family with them as well. And they, in essence, made the presentation at the last meeting. I had not been retained at that point to help them through the process. I was retained subsequent to that meeting that ended up in a 2-2 vote to look at their petition, in essence, their submittals, make any suggestions that I thought might be relevant or helpful to members of the Board of Zoning Appeals in the furtherance of trying to make a vote. In essence, this is a request for variance from the buffer yard requirements that are established in the agricultural acreage. You would note, and for Mr. Pakel's benefit, there's really not any formal agriculture on either of these two properties, although the Goldsmiths who own property immediately behind and to the side of the Carries have a horse farm there, and they board horses and have horses there. So it's an agricultural use of sorts in that regard, but there isn't any farming or anything of that nature with regard to that. Nevertheless, these are two ag parcels that are together. And the buffer yard for ag parcels is a 40-foot buffer yard. They're seeking to put a pool in. They've looked at all different opportunities and alternatives as to where to locate the pool, whether it could be a little closer to the house. That's going to cause removal of a beautiful tree that they have there that kind of defines the property that I don't think anybody in the area wants to see. The other alternative is to put it in the back where they've located it. Part of the reason it's located in this particular general location is it can be viewed from the house. Back in 2006, there was a barn that was put up that is in the side yard setback. A variance was granted for that, and it exists today and has existed apparently since 2006 without any problems from the neighbors or complaints from the neighbors or anything of that nature. The Carries, before they presented to you at the last meeting, actually went and received letters that are part of your packet from the surrounding property owners indicating they had no specific objections to this at all. And that includes the Goldsmiths, who are the ones that are immediately adjacent and to the rear of this particular property. They indicated that they had no objection to the pool. Notwithstanding all of that, the Carries also provided me with some of the transcript and some of the information of some of the comments. And I picked up on Member Postlewaite's comments with regard to her concerns regarding horses. I don't know all that much about horses, but I know that Kathy Postlewaite does. And so I went ahead and called the Goldsmiths and had a discussion with Mrs. Goldsmith about the fact that this pool is going to be located fairly close to the back property line. They board horses back there. They have a board fence that currently separates the property, but that's all they have back there. She did not seem particularly concerned about that, but she did offer a caveat. She indicated to me, and we have memorialized that in correspondence that's part of your packet, that she doesn't know how the horses are going to react to the fact that there's a pool and there's kids back there fairly close to the property line. She doesn't think that's going to be a problem. And she thinks when the construction occurs, that will adjust them to that and that won't be a problem. But she suggested, if there's a problem, we'll just put some landscaping and other things back there. And I suggested to him to her, with all due respect, that my clients were the ones that were asking for something that shouldn't really be her responsibility to do that. And that it's best to try to deal with these things now, if we can, to make sure they're memorialized or get them in writing. So essentially what I have done is, and talking with the Carries who readily agree to this, is to have them agree to put up a 40-foot, 8-foot solid board fence along the area of the pool, between the pool and the fence that's currently there that defines the property line, which essentially is the length of the pool that would shelter the pool and some of the noise from the horses that are boarded behind that particular area. And in talking with Mrs. Goldsmith, she doesn't suggest that be done now. She'd like the opportunity to see how the horses react, and if there's any negative reaction, she would request that. And so we have committed, and we'll put this in written commitment form with any suggestions that members of the board have, to go ahead and construct that pool, or construct the pool and the fence as designated in the letter, in the event that Mrs. Goldsmith decides that that is necessary. And it doesn't have to be an explanation of why. If she wants the fence, she just simply has to write a letter, and that will trigger our requirement to go ahead and construct that fence. I couldn't think of a better way to try to solve it, not knowing whether it's a problem that needs to be solved, than try to preemptively deal with it and make sure there's a solution to this and that it's an ironclad solution and acceptable to both parties, and hopefully the board itself, in the event that Mrs. Goldsmith decides that there's a concern. One of the other thing that I did a little research on for the Carries, because I know there were some comments about this 40-foot ag buffer yard. That was born out of the old ordinances that were established in the county a number of years ago. I know because I have most of the ordinances back into the 60s that I keep at the office from time to time. You need to go back and take a peek at them to see what historical information you can glean from them. And in our last ordinance that was done, I think in the 90s, there was a provision put in there with regard to the buffer yard. It came about not because farmers themselves need any buffer yard one to the other. It came about because of the starting proliferation of single-family residences in the ag areas and how that might interface with the farming community. So two things were born of that: a 40-foot buffer yard and the right to farm covenant that is normally required, that you require in these types of cases where you're actually putting a single family residence in an agricultural ground. Here, the residents have been there for a long period of time. I thought about making that suggestion, but I don't think it's really relevant because we don't really have farming. We really have horses in that particular location. And interestingly enough, it's not because of setbacks from noise or any of that thing. That aspect of it. It was born out of the fact that we didn't want to have any plantings in that particular area. In the event somebody put a home there, they didn't want to put trees or any type of shrubs in that buffer yard area in case they spray on the other side of it. It would kill all of that. So specifically in your ordinance itself, under the ag plantings, it said no plantings permitted in the 30-foot closest to the agricultural zoning in that 40-foot buffer yard. So in essence, what we have is a 10-foot buffer yard. You don't have any plantings in there or anything like that. You can't put any plantings in there, at least in terms of use from a green standpoint or an ecological standpoint. They don't allow any plants in that 30-foot buffer yard. We really don't have that in this situation at all. It's not a traditional situation like we've seen. This language is inherited from the agricultural uses that we had in the county. These are really two residential uses. One has horses, the other does not, but they still carry the ag zoning classification. That's why they have to be dealt with. Be happy to answer any questions, engage in any discussions. I think the Carries just want to do the right thing. They want to be able to put the pool back there if they can. Their desires to have their kids outside, not inside on the computers. We've talked with them a little bit about that. Even the last vacation they took where they went had that in mind. So that really is something that they're attuned to. But they really have tried to see if we could make this correct with the adjacent property owner, Mrs. Goldsmith, and make sure that even needs that she may not be expressing right now are dealt with in the event that they crop up later, which I think is important, not to have these kinds of concerns fester. If there is a concern, she has a concern, we'll just build the fence. Not a problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the petitioner's representative? Hearing
Could I,
none?
Mr. Mundy, I wonder if I could just share a couple of thoughts because I've been cited. So I would just like to point out that looking back through the minutes from last month's meeting, my concerns were not about noise with regard to having a pool in that spot. Horses will adjust, and this in fact is an agricultural use. I keep hearing that this is not ag, but I have horses, and believe me, it's an agricultural use. There are things that come along with horses that are purely not residential. What I want to say, results. Let's put it that way. My concern is with the constraints on the neighboring property owner, that putting a pool in that spot, which will essentially be encompassed by the agricultural buffer area for its entire length and parallel to that horse fence. The current owner of that neighboring property may not run a spreader along that fence line. I know that we do, and it's a way to keep weeds down from growing up underneath the fence. Also, if the horses are pastured in that area, they may well come and stand there, and there are things that result from that process that may not be so pleasant for anyone who's using the fence or using the pool, I'm sorry. So I think that if in fact the board makes the decision to approve this petition, and I continue to feel that it should not be approved, that somehow some kind of waiver or whatever needs to be attached to both the petitioner's property and in subsequent, if there are other owners of this property in future, that give the neighbor with the horse farm the ability to use that property of the horse farm in whatever way he or she deems to be appropriate. And that would include running a spreader and boarding horses and having horses pasturing in that neighboring parcel of land. I suspect if that were a herd of cows there, perhaps the pool might not seem so appealing in that location because of the odors and other things that are attached to having livestock. And horses are in fact livestock, and it is in fact an agricultural use in my view.
Thank you, Mrs. Postlewaite. I have a question for you, Mrs. Postlewaite. In your opinion, I know you're a horse owner. And maybe I'm incorrect in this. I thought there was also some concern about the activities in the pool might spook the horses to some extent. But for that and for some of the other things that you mentioned, what is your opinion about the 8-foot fence that they have proposed would be constructed if needed? Would that alleviate any of those issues? I know the odor issue would not go away, but any of the others?
Well, I'm not sure that's an elegant solution to what would be a problem. I would, from the petitioner's side of that fence, I would be concerned about having a fence with just off the pool deck. I mean, we're only talking about a 10-foot distance, if my memory serves me well, between that pool and the fence line. And you would introduce into that space a long span of a wooden fence, and I could see the possibility of injury of somebody, getting out of the pool and running along the pool deck, which I know children are not supposed to do. But I think the chance of injury there might be a problem. I'm not a big believer in privacy fences like that. And it's hard to know, as you say, it will not alleviate the possibility of odors that come from livestock. I think the horses, one way or another, a lot depends on the horse. Some are more nervous than others. Others adjust very well to having activity around them over time. But again, my concern is really about the constraints that will be placed on the neighbor, whether it's that neighbor or that person sells the property in future, to having that pool, particularly since we're talking about not just the end of the pool, we're talking about the entire span of the length of the pool running parallel to their property. Did that answer your question, Mr. Monday?
Yes, thank you. Are there any other questions for the petitioner's representative? Seeing none, are there any remonstrators here tonight or online who wish to speak for or against this petition? Nope, seeing none. Do we have the staff report, please?
Yes, thank you. Kind of give a brief history just for the member who wasn't here. Initially, these type of requests can go to the building commissioner, which this petition did go to our former building commissioner. and he did not approve the waiver request of the buffer yard. Therefore, the petitioners went to the BZA to request the variance. With that said, looking at the surrounding properties in the area that don't have pools and also are not in the buffer yard, I think, and it also said in the letter from the former building commissioner, which staff is also agreeable to, that it's meant for agriculture type uses to be buffered from that, not necessarily pools. So with that said, staff is not in favor of this request, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for staff?
When was the party or the property subdivided? The two properties next door, they're obviously newer homes, but were they originally attached to this property?
Adjacent parcels?
Yes.
Try to pull it up here and look.
Mhm.
So food for thought, another owner of that horse farm property in the future could take that pasture and turn that into tillable land if they so chose. In which case you have an overspray issue again. Mr. Mundy, in
Yes,
response-
Mr.
in
Andreoli.
response to the question that was posed by Mr. Patel, my client advises in the research that she did before she bought the property, the actual property has been in existence since in the 1800s. It was an old house there for many, many years. I don't know that it was actually attached to the property next to it or when that split occurred, if it even was a split. At some point, probably was, but we have no independent knowledge as to when that split actually took place.
Maybe a more direct question is, when were those two homes built?
Pardon?
When were those two homes adjacent to this property built? Has it last 10 years, last 2 decades?
For both the petitioner and the representative, our transcriptionist had a difficult time from the last meeting because there was a lot of talk that did not occur at the microphone. So if you would please, anything that you wish to share with this board, please do so at the microphone. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'm Laura Carey at 11875 East 200 South. We moved here a year ago from Colorado, and we purchased a very old farmhouse that I believe was kind of reigned over all that property at some point in time. I don't know the exact dates that the adjacent properties were constructed, so I'm afraid I don't have that information, but I believe it's like 80s or 90s or something.
In talking with Mrs. Goldsmith, they've occupied that property, because I'm familiar who they were, for a number of many years. I just don't know when,
Okay.
how they first constructed the property, but those two properties have been there for many years adjacent to each other. And
Okay.
as they say, there was a barn that was put up that needed a side yard setback immediately adjacent to the Goldsmith, and that was done in 2006 and was approved by the board without any objection. I asked Mrs. Goldsmith about that. They haven't had any problems or difficulties. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to her were the issues that member Postlewaite raised with regard to the horses, because if anybody would have any concerns, it would be the people who live there who had the horses and have had them there for many years. So I want to make sure she didn't have any problems, or if she suggested something else. And she told me that, I'd be happy to go ahead and just put some landscaping in if there's an issue later. But in talking with my client, that really shouldn't be up to her to do that. That should be what we're doing if we're seeking to go ahead and get a variance and put a pool there. So we fixed on the wall. And I must tell you, if we get to do the wall and she asks for that, or she prefers landscaping, we'll do the alternative, and we'd be happy to put that in the actual commitments, that if we decide that she wants landscaping as opposed to trees and this, that, and the other, as opposed to a wall, to the extent we have room, and even on her side, we'd be happy to go ahead and do that as an alternative, with cost it out and put the same dollar amount in. We have no issue with either one if she makes that decision. So.
Thank you. May I
Thank you.
say-
No, you may not.
I may interrupt. The property to the east, or I'm sorry, to the west, it looks like the residence and the barn were constructed in 1991, according to the Boone County property record card.
It appears based on the aerial that there are a series of 5 or 6 what look like 80 to 100 acre lots that originally marched down that road, and that farmhouse would have been the house of that 80 or 100 acre plot that was then subdivided along 200 for what appears to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other 5 or 6 other homes and residences. So.
That's all I had. Thank you.
So I'm still of the same mindset as before. Setbacks, buffer yards, are all fairly common to every type of residential and even commercial and even agricultural property we have out there. While we regularly give variances for, especially, let's say, the village for setbacks or buffers or anything, it's because there's actually some sort of history of, and sometimes we're actually trying to impose a set of zoning rules and regs after the property was developed. And the property was not developed with those rules in mind, and so variances are often needed just to get it into compliance. When we talk about the idea of barns being in these buffer yards, we're also talking about a structure whose use is compatible with the underlying zoning. Later, we have another request for a barn in a buffer yard, but it's fairly clear looking through it. It is intended to be used as a barn for storage. There's no plumbing. It seems to be the bare minimum, and it seems like it would be compatible to whatever was going on in any adjoining property. A pool is not a compatible use. It is a completely different type of use than a barn or anything else that you would find in an agriculturally zoned piece of property. Finally, as you look through the findings of fact, number 3 is strict application of the terms of the zoning ordinance will result in unnecessary hardships in the use of the property. If you read through all their responses, these are all what I would consider emotional choices. They don't want to cut down a tree. They don't want to use up grass. They don't want to change the driveway. The property can still be used as their residence as is. And there's plenty of other locations a pool could be placed on that usable ground, and they could get all their emotional benefit of the pool without requiring a variance.
Thank you for those comments. I would say that when we look at those procedural considerations, it is often difficult to come up with what might be a hardship in everyone's mind if the ordinance was applied strictly in some cases. So while I agree with you, continue to live there, we have had lots of cases where granting a variance to allow what the petitioner is asking for would be difficult to convince everyone that it was a hardship if we strictly applied it. And I'll give my own opinion on it. I view this as fairly low risk in terms of creating future problems, but we'll admit that if the ground immediately behind the pool were turned into tillable ground, spraying could be an issue. The spraying now would not be what you'd want occurring near a pool. But it's been a horse farm for some time. There are ways of making certain that there's safety involved in that. And the use of the land, I see as compatible in that you could always make the case that there's never a place for a pool in the country, and that simply isn't true. It can be compatible, but in their case, they wish to have it within that buffer zone.
I would like to just mention, and again, I think, as I've said a moment ago, I do think that putting a pool in that spot puts a constraint on the neighbor, whether it's the existing neighbor or anybody who might subsequently buy that property as regards to the use of their own property. And I think the idea that it might turn into tillable ground is a good example of that, but also being able to run a manure spreader. I would say if in fact the board decides to approve this petition, that something should be attached to it, which precludes any complaint on the part of the petitioner with regard to what's happening on the neighboring property. And that includes smells, livestock smells, or effluent from livestock that would be happening in that horse pasture, because there would be livestock, whether it be horses or cows or whatever they might choose to have there. So I think that would have to be tied to that property going forward, so that within a year or whatever, there aren't complaints about, well, gosh, we like to be at our pool, but it smells bad because there are horses that stand there and watch us and do what horses do. So that would be my suggestion if the board feels the need to approve this petition.
So Mrs. Postaway, you're essentially saying, I think, that the adjoining neighbor there needs to be assured of the right to farm, which includes all of those things that you mentioned. Is that correct?
Mr. Monday, that if someone came to me and said they wanted to build a pool within 10 feet of my horse fence, I would be very stringently opposed to that happening, because I think, I just don't think I think there's risk to that with regard to the use of the pool and also the use of the pasturage that I have here. So I think I would want assurances that there are not going to be problems because of unforeseen things with regard to that livestock. I don't know whether they've spent a lot of time out there in that spot where they're wanting to put the pool, whether they've gone over, maybe they visited the horse farm, maybe they've been in the barn, maybe they've been around where the horses are, to understand that there are things that come with having horses that may not be consistent with having a pool in that spot.
Thank you.
Mr. President, may I respond to that suggestion in terms of our thoughts on it?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Andrew.
As I mentioned, maybe based upon the comments that Member Postlewaite has made, although I wasn't thinking in light of using the right to farm law, but maybe it would be applicable. It may not be applicable with Mrs. Goldsmith, but if she would sell the property and they decide to have cattle or hogs or something else in that agricultural use as opposed to the horse farm, she doesn't want to buy herself a problem, because now we've got a residential use with a pool right next to her property. So I have no problem in adding a right to farm covenant along with the covenant with regard to building the fence. I think that makes sense to me. If it makes sense to members of the board.
I don't think the intent of the Right to Farm Act is to allow variances to be granted on any certain piece of property. The Right to Farm Act what we've put out there is just a blanket cover that whenever somebody is putting a residential use in an agricultural area, the underlying land is zoned agricultural, that they understand that the adjoining properties as they conduct their business may have a blanket effect on the entirety of the lot and the residents and everything they've done. I see the Right to Farm Act as a protection that goes one certain direction. It shouldn't go back and forth. So once again, I don't think signing a Right to Farm Act is a reason to allow a grant of variance. It's not the intent.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. And I agree that that is the intent of the Right to Farm Act. It is not to facilitate the granting of a variance.
Just to follow, this is a beautiful property. And I understand your wants and needs, but I also, it really looks like there are additional places that you could look at. And if this were an extension of the existing barn that you're talking about, I mean, it would be like a no-brainer for me, to be honest. But I'm having a tough time not finding, I mean, looking at your property and I see a couple of different places that I would much rather have a pool with my kids that age.
One would be hidden by a garage.
Sir, if Mr. Carey, if you would come to the microphone, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pical, for your comments. One of the things we spent quite a bit of time going through, like the last one, was identifying the different locations and some of the challenges with each one of those locations. Because I agree with you, when we had bought that property, we thought, oh, there'll be no problem putting in a pool. My problem is I want to be able to see the children from the house. This is, in my opinion, the best, most safe location that I can see the kids. I mean, I spent time putting an 80-page document together and hiring our buddy here because I want to go to sleep at night knowing I've tried everything to create the most safe location for our kids to swim. Also, whether it's this pool or any other pool, I have 3 wonderful children, and there are many wonderful children in this community. I implore each one of you to think long and hard about anybody that brings a pool in front of you. Because as parents, we have a tidal wave of inputs coming into our children's lives where, you know, they want to do this. Here we are trying to create a place in the community, not just for our children, but for their friends to come to create new memories, to have new opportunities. And you may call this an emotional thing, but it is. I think it's really important that as community members, we do everything we can to facilitate these opportunities. The reality is this is in my opinion, a wonderful location for the pool. It's the best and safest location. There's a U-shaped driveway. I don't know if you could see from the aerial. If you draw a 40-foot line from the outside of the property, you can see there isn't a good other option for this pool to be placed.
Do you operate ag equipment?
Do I personally? No.
It's for personal private vehicles, right?
Yeah.
There's no ag vehicles going down that driveway.
No.
It's an intended use.
Yes. And I might add, just as a point, I grew up on a farm with horses. I'm very familiar with how they smell and where they, I didn't do it in a big scale. It was only a 5-acre farm. My father's visiting from Western New York. He knows what that's like. I'm familiar with horses and their spookiness and whatnot. And we treat all the neighbors with like the utmost respect. I just know that's not going to be an issue.
And I want to be clear that I have no problem with someone wanting to put a pool next to a horse farm or a hog farm or anything like that. That is your prerogative. What I do have a problem with is the location when there are other locations that I can see myself.
Well, the most suitable other location is next to the house or close to the house. And to do that, we'll have to take that large tree out, which is a kind of a focal point. And
yeah. So this is not technically, though, the safest place to put the pool. Safest place to put the pool is closest to the house. It just happens to require a tree coming out. So I just want that clear because this is far enough away from the house that it's actually less safe than if it were close
That's a
to the
sprint.
house.
That's a
I agree.
full-on sprint to get to the.
I was looking at the picture that you provided off the back porch, and I go back to a comment I made last time that the water level of a pool is 8 to 12 inches below the deck of the pool. And with the glare of light, you will not be able to see below the surface of that pool. And so if one of your kids had an accident and was floating below the surface, you would not see that from the back porch. So this is not the safest place. The safest place is to take a tree out and put it in there. And Mr. Andreoli, I have a lot of respect for you. You mentioned something about that tree being, I don't know, can't remember your word, iconic or whatever it was initially. It's one of 3 trees on that side, and it's not even the biggest one. So
if that were the case, believe me, if it were just some ordinary tree in an ordinary area of the yard, we wouldn't even be here right now. We just would have done it. But it's the most gorgeous tree on our property. It's amazing. It makes the property. We say this all the time, but also that's our only location that's fenced in and allows dogs and kids to run around
In the middle of the U-shaped driveway.
Yeah, it's the only spot we have as well. So I wish this were the case. I wish it would have been easier. We would not be here. The amount of effort that's put into this to try and get the pool in the right spot, the best spot by far, was not because we enjoy going through all this work and doing all this. It was an unbelievable amount of work. Because the bottom line is we can't get a pool otherwise. It's just not going to happen.
you know, there used to be a pool in that exact same spot.
It's above ground pool,
Above ground, little
just a
round
little
pool.
tiny thing.
It's not a little tiny thing. It's about as big surface area wise as the pool you're going to put in,
Yeah, I know.
not
but
including the deck. So, I mean,
if it was an
the pool
above ground
works
pool,
there.
maybe we'd put it there. But
But even so, it will ruin the tree, even if it was a little above ground pool is what I was told, and that's why they took it down. So that's a beautiful tree. My Christmas cards I sent out were named Catalpa Hideaway because of the look of it. It does, I wonder if neighbors would be more offended by that tree being taken down than by a pool because it is so beautiful.
Well, they frankly can't see it because there's trees all around it that block their view of that tree.
What was your comment? I'm sorry, Mr.
I
Lake.
just said that your neighbors can't even see that tree because there's trees, large mature trees all the way around your property that screen their view of that tree.
Well, they can when they come over to our house. Anyway, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to hear our case. I firmly believe, and I really wish you could come over and just look at the property because I think you would see that there's been a lot of time spent on this for a good reason. I guess I have no more to add. I think this is a best wonderful use of space for this property, not just for us, but for future owners. I believe it is safe. Mr. Litt, you are absolutely right. I grew up with a pool as well, and you want to be close by if you have little kids. Our kids can swim. It's more you peek out if it's a visual check to make sure they're okay. You know, you can have cameras and stuff, but you don't want to like open up a phone and look on a camera or run. You just want to be able to look out the window and say, are all 3 kids there? Are they having fun? You know, it's a visual check. And as a mother, I can tell you, I am more concerned than anyone else in this room about the safety of my kids. And I believe that's the safest place. Sorry, I'll stop talking. I do appreciate whatever you decide. I thank you for this time and for everybody else who's been incredibly patient. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further discussion among the board?
They make a motion?
Yep, and there's nothing from online. Okay, thank you. Mr. Andreoli, did you have one more point to make?
Although there hasn't been any discussion with regard to how close this is to the side yard setback. We are willing to look at and have looked at alternatives if the side yard setback closest to the Goldsmiths, even though they haven't raised this issue as a problem, we can move that pool farther away from that side yard setback. So we're only asking for a rear yard setback for the pool. We can adjust that by switching in terms of how the pool will be situated back there. So at least the pool proper will be still in view, but farther to the one side and away from the side yard setback with the Goldsmith. It would just simply move down the property line and we would not have a side yard setback. Although the Goldsmith hasn't raised a concern about that. If that is significant or a change that would justify a vote by a member of the board, we'd be willing to do that and just move that pool down so that it would be out of the side yard setback and only in the rear yard setback that we would need a variance from, but not a side yard setback. We can relocate it and still accomplish it by juxtapositioning where the concrete might be.
But isn't that going to make the view of the pool worse?
Pardon?
Wouldn't that make the view of the pool worse? The ability to see? No, I'm actually being very serious. What you're suggesting is moving the pool to the east, which means the existing 600 and some odd square foot barn gets in the way of the view from the house. So
It would still be in the same general location.
I've heard 15 minutes about how this one specific,
Mr. Jones, the location wouldn't change the location of
All
the
right.
pool, the whole, oh, sorry. But I mean, I think there's a miscommunication. Sorry, I'm so bad at this stuff.
can we get a motion?
Yeah, I think that Mr. Jones has a point. You would still be asking for the rear yard setback.
Yes, we would still need the
variance,
rear
and if-
yard.
and
We
there
would just
are,
not need
uh,
the side yard if that was significant to any members of the board. If not, then it's a suggestion that is going nowhere, but it is a suggestion nonetheless. And I know we've approved a lot of pools with a lot of variances, including some in Zionsville on lots that really shouldn't accommodate them. And given the space of these two lots and the size of them, I would respectfully suggest that putting the pool in the rear yard, especially when the neighbor has absolutely no objection to it, does not cause harm to our ordinances or your approval process. But thank you.
Is there any merit to some discussion among the board on a slightly modified location?
Not for me.
Hearing
No.
none, then I think we are in a position where we need a motion made.
I move the docket 2022-39-DSV Development Standards Variance for reduction in the buffer yard to construct an in-ground swimming pool at the property located at 11875 East 200 South Zionsville in the Rural Agricultural Zoning District, AG, be denied.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Is there a second?
Second.
Second,
Thank you, Mr. Pical. I suggest we do a roll call vote, particularly since this is postal weight, is virtual.
Mr. Jones?
Nay.
Whoops, just a moment.
I'm sorry.
The
My bad.
the motion
yes.
is, and I'll say this for everyone's
All right.
benefit, Larry, the motion
got you.
is to deny the petition. So a yay vote would be denial, a nay vote would be opposition.
Guess I need to learn how I denials. All right. Yay.
Mrs. Postal Weight,
yay,
Mr. Pical,
Yay.
Mr. Lake.
Okay.
Nay. So the motion to deny petition was approved 4-1. Thank you for all of your efforts, Mr. and Mrs. Carey.
I hope to see you guys back.
we will need to have the finding of facts, and that'll be next time for our next meeting to sign those. The next item on the agenda is petition number 2022-40-DSV, D. Giles, 6490 South State Road 267, Lebanon. This was a petition that was continued from the July 6th meeting. It was continued due to an error in the notifications. Those have now been made. And Mr. Franson, will you be representing Mr. Giles?
Yes, sir. My name is Kent Franzen. Mr. Bundy, gentlemen, ladies of the board. I'm an attorney practicing at 225 West Main Street in Lebanon. And with me here this evening is Daniel Giles, the petitioner. Mr. Giles has lived at this location, 6490 South State Road 267, for nearly 50 years. He built that home on that property in 1975. He is a retired union electrician. He has one outbuilding, accessory building, pole type building on the property. But as like a lot of us, we seem to accumulate more stuff than we have room for. And he would like a second building on the property to essentially mirror the existing pole barn. To do that, he needs 3 development standards variances. Of course, the existing barn is larger, is taller than the house on the property, as is common with these pole barns. He would like to have the new building be the same height as the existing building. It would be located immediately to the south of the existing building, essentially right up against it. Be the same height, would be a 30 by 60 building, 1,800 square feet in size. And that, coupled with the barn that's already there, puts him above the total square footage of the existing residential structure on the property, hence the need for the second variance. And the third variance is he would like to locate this building on the south side of the existing barn, close to the south side of his property. Hence, he needs a variance within the 40-foot ag buffer in the area. The good news about it is, frankly, it will not look odd. Sometimes these things get decided, it seems to me, based upon appearances. It won't stick out. The building will be compatible with the existing barn. The property to the south has a big side yard, which runs all the way up close to Mr. Giles's own home. So putting the barn there will not be obviously close to the boundary line. You can't tell by driving by there, looking at the property, where the boundary line is. The property owner to the south, Mr. Conan, has written a letter in support of the application before you tonight. The staff report, I think, addresses accurately the practical realities of this situation. The whole area out there along 267 is a residential area, largely, with any number of outbuildings, accessory buildings, barns. Several of them have multiple buildings on the property. This will not look unusual. It will fit into what's there now. He would like to put his RV in there. He's got a couple of tractors, which he has mowing equipment. He's got a vehicle he would like to store. And he would rather get it in there, get it inside, rather than having it outside, where it tends to get a little junky when these sorts of these things get just stacked up outside. So putting a nice building there and putting these pieces of equipment inside actually will, I think, improve the view and look of the appearance of the neighborhood than if this variance would be denied. This is not a business activity. He will not be conducting any business activity. He's retired. And he has no interest in doing business. It's not a building for a maid or a grandmother or a relative. There'll be no plumbing or living quarters. So with that, Mr. Giles is here. He's happy to answer any questions. I presented some photographs that I took before the last proposed meetings. In case some of you have not had a chance to see it, happy to explain what those pictures reflect if you have any questions about them. Thank you for your consideration. That's all we have at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Franson. We're passing those photos down now for those that had not seen the larger photographs that you brought this evening. As those are being viewed, does anyone have questions for Mr. Franson or Mr. Giles? Seeing none, do we have any remonstrators here this evening or online? Nothing online, no one here this evening. All right, could we have the staff report, please?
Thank you. I'll start by talking about the buffer yard, just be clear on that first. As I stated last time, the buffer yard can be waived by the building commissioner. Unfortunately, we don't have a technical building commissioner currently, so that option to waive that, it's not an option. They were already going to the BZA for the accessory square footage and the height, so we just added on to the petition. With this specific request, as it relates to the buffer yard, staff had felt that there are other pole barns in the immediate area that also do not meet the buffer yard, and traditionally a pole barn is a more agricultural type structure. So with that said, and with the height and also the square footage also kind of goes along with what's around the immediate area, and therefore staff is in favor of all three of the requests and happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Any discussion or questions among the board? Hearing none, is there a motion to this petition?
I move that docket number 2022-40-DSV Development Standards Variance to provide for the accessory square footage to exceed the primary up to 6,147 square feet at the property located at 6490 South State Road 267, Lebanon, Indiana, 46052 in the Rural Agricultural Zoning District AG be approved as filed based upon the findings of fact and substantial compliance with the submitted site plans and concepts.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And Mrs. Postlewaite, I'll just ask to verify that was an aye from you. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
All right.
That motion passes.
Very,
One question.
Yeah.
What are the hours for the bar? And
You would pick up on that.
well, yeah, it says under the property history that there's a family dwelling, attached garage, there's a bar out there, swimming pool with a deck and patio. So I'm just interested in the hours the bar is open. Then do you get to use the pool too?
That's what happens when you type your own paperwork.
Don't give him hours, Mr. Giles. He'll be out.
all right. Variance number 2. I move the docket number 2022-40-DSV Development Standards Variance to provide for the accessory structure to exceed the height of the primary at the property located at 6490 South State Route 267, Lebanon, Indiana, 46052 in the Rural Agricultural Zoning District AG be approved as filed based upon the findings of fact and substantial compliance with the submitted site plans and concepts.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. The motion passes.
And number 3, I move that docket number 2022-40-DSV Development Standards Variance for a reduction in the buffer yard to construct a pole barn at the property located at 6490 South State Route 267, Lebanon, Indiana 46052 in the Rural Agricultural Zoning District AG be approved as filed based upon the findings of fact and substantial compliance with the submitted site plans and concepts.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Is there a second?
Second,
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Jones and Mrs. Postaway. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes. Best of luck with your project, Mr. Giles. That brings us to new business. First item under new business is petition number 2022-43-DSV. M. Hussein at Evan 8750 East 575 South in Zionsville. Petition for a development standard variance to provide for an addition which reduces the front yard setback, memorializes the existing front yard setback in the rural single-family residential district R2. Mr. Hussein?
Yes, I'm
Would
Mir
you tell us-
Hussain. I'm the petitioner, the owner of the house. I don't have a lawyer or an attorney. So we bought this house in 2017. When we bought this house, we didn't know that there's a road coming up. The road was constructed. We were living in the house, but there's a lot of noise and dust. We're not able to use the porch. So my wife and me decided to build a washroom because the bedroom adjacent to that one. We have a full bath on the ground floor, but we have to walk through the living room. So we thought the best use of that porch would be to build a full bath. And then we need a new porch because we have two little ones. They're going to school, so they wait for their bus.
All right, it's that simple.
Yeah.
Any questions for the petitioner? Anyone here or online that would just like to speak for or against this project? Seeing none, could we have a staff report?
Thank you. The petitioner, like he stated, wanting to put a front porch on the rear, to the south of this property. And then also at the same time, converting an existing covered porch into a bathroom. And while he's not increasing the square footage, we wanted to memorialize that setback as well. As you may notice, there's been some right of way acquired recently with this property for the extension of Marysville Road. With all that said, and also getting DPW's, I don't want to say approval, but we ran this by them. They weren't opposed to the request either with site distance or anything like that. That staff is in favor of the request, the two requests, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
So DPW has no objection to the petition. Thank you. Questions for staff?
Would these additions have been in compliance prior to the acquisition of the additional right of way?
I don't believe so, because the setback would be either 70 feet from the center line or 20 feet from the property line, whichever is greater. So I think that 70 foot would still apply regardless.
Okay.
So this would memorialize what was already out of compliance anyhow. Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, is there a motion on this petition?
I move the docket number 2022-43-DSV Development Standards Variance to provide for the front yard setback to be reduced to 42 foot from the center line of the road to allow for a covered porch at the property located at 8750 East 575 South, Zionsville, Indiana 46077 in the rural single and two-family residential zoning district R-2 be approved as filed based upon the findings of fact and substantial compliance with the submitted site plans and concepts.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Pacao. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion passes.
I move that docket number 2022-43-DSV Development Standards Variance to provide for a memorialization of the existing front yard setback at the property located at 8750 East 575 South Indianapolis, Indiana, 46077 in the rural single and two-family residential zoning district R2 be approved as filed based upon the findings of fact and substantial compliance with the submitted site plans and concepts.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Pacao. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Best of luck with your project, Mr. Pacao. Next item on the agenda is petition number 2022-44-DSV. F. Paul 3575 East 400 South Lebanon, petition for development standard variance to provide for accessory structure which exceeds the permitted accessory square footage and exceeds the allowable height for an accessory building in the rural agricultural zone district AG. Hello, would you
Hi.
state your name and tell us
Floyd
about the
and
project,
Cindy
please?
Paul. We live at 3575 East, 400 South Lebanon. We moved there in the facility or in the house, sorry. We're not a lawyer either.
You don't need to be.
I feel like I need to after all. Anyway, we moved there last fall and it has an existing garage. It's like 2 and 2, so it's long rather than wide. And the back part of it, the previous owner, which was I think 93 or 94, had a wood shop back there. Yeah, Mr. Hunter. And my husband likes his Mustang. He has a 1970 Mustang that he loves. And he has a truck, but the truck doesn't fit because the garage is so short. It's a four-wheeler, not a four-wheeler, four-wheel drive. Sorry. I hate talking in public.
Big truck.
Anyway, he would like to have a pole barn built like a L shape at the back of it. And I think we have 2 is the square footage accessory variance and in height. In order to have his truck in there, it has to be, I think, 14-foot sides. And
Let's get my trailers in too.
yeah. And there's right next to us has one that's real similar, we think, to the same size that we have on the west side, I think.
Yes.
Sorry, but that's what we would like to do is just as a storage for his Mustang and his truck. Thank you. Sorry.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Paul. Any questions for the petitioner? Hearing none. Any remonstrators online? No, thank you. Could we have the staff report, please?
So this request is pretty similar to the Giles petition that you just heard. However, they are meeting the 40-foot buffer yard. They're requesting to be over on accessory square footage as well as the height is taller than the residence. Looking at the surrounding areas, also go over the height with other pole barns and accessory structures and accessory square footage. So with that said, staff is in favor of the 2 requests and I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Hearing none, is there a motion for this petition?
I guess I'll do it. I move the docket number 2022-44-DSV Development Standards Variance to provide for the accessory square footage to exceed the primary up to 3,468 square foot at the property located at 3575 East 400 South Lebanon, Indiana, 46052 in the rural agricultural zoning district AG be approved as filed based upon the findings of fact and substantial compliance with the submitted site plans and concepts.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 This is Postaway. I think you're muted.
Aye.
Okay,
I'm not, but I. that was-
okay, thank you. That motion is approved.
I move the docket number 2022-44-DSV Development Standards Variance to provide for the accessory structure to exceed the height of the primary at the property located at 3575 East 400 South, Lebanon, Indiana, 46052 in the Rural Agricultural Zoning District AG be approved as filed based upon the findings of fact and substantial compliance with the submitted site plans and concepts.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Best of luck with your project.
Thank you.
We have nothing further on the agenda. So unless someone has a need to present some revolutionary news to this committee, I would declare us adjourned.
Second that.
Thank you all. Sorry to not be there in person.
See you,
Thanks,
Kathy.
Kathy. I understand you got exposed, so you did us all a favor.
I was doing the granny nanny yesterday, and unfortunately, my granddaughter has now tested positive. So,
Oh,
Well, I hope
sorry.
it doesn't go any further.
yeah, well, me too. And hopefully she won't have a serious case. She's just a little.
Right.
Anyway, stay well, all of you.
All right, Kathy, there will be these, you can sign these at the next meeting.
Okay. Well, if Suzanne needs for me to come in sometime and sign them, I can do that also, whatever is easiest. So,
Suzanne, what's the
I'll
preference?
let you know. It's probably fine to wait
Okay.
until the next meeting unless you want to come in.
okay, well, just let me know either way.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Go without that.
Yeah.